Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. Praises belong to Allah. We praise Him, we seek His help, and we seek His forgiveness from the evil of our own souls and our bad deeds. Whomsoever Allah guides, no one can lead astray, and whomsoever Allah leads astray, no one can guide. And I bear witness that Allah is one, bearing no partner, and that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is His final messenger. Allah says in the Quran, in Surah Al-Imran, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اتَّقُوا اللَّهَ حَقَّ تُقَاتِهِ وَلَا تَمُوتُنَّ إِلَّا وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ, which translates as, O you who believe, fear Allah as you should be feared, and die not except in a state of Islam. My dear respected brothers and sisters, inshallah today's khutbah is a sort of reframing and restructuring in our approach towards understanding what Islam requires of us. And from my research or from my understanding of what Islam actually means, it boils down to three main relationships. Three relationships, right? To give you an overview, the first relationship is about between you and Allah, the Creator. The second relationship is between you and His creation. And the third one, I'll leave as a mystery until the second part of the khutbah, I'll keep you guessing. So for now, let's focus on the first two. Now, just draw a simple analogy in mind, right? Imagine you're an employee of any design company, for instance. Very simple company, you've got a boss, and you've got colleagues on the same level, right? And this simple analogy establishes these first two relationships. Your boss requires specific things from you, such as deadlines, reports, only that he will want from you. No other colleague will want you from that, right? The colleagues around you, all they need is that you treat them well, treat them equally, and you make sure you give them their rights. A 2D relationship that is established in this very simple analogy. And that's the same thing between you and Allah and you and His creation. Let's focus on the first one, between you and Allah. So, if you look at the rights which Allah asks for, right? Very simple things. 5 basic pillars in Islam. 5 basic pillars. You're required to pray 5 times a day, give your zakat, fast in Ramadan, and do your Hajj, right? On top of that, Allah commands you to encourage the good and forbid the evil, right? These are the simplest, most basic requirements that Allah demands of you. And throughout this whole relationship, the scholars say that there are 3 different ways in how you approach your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. 3 relationships. One channel is through fear of Allah. So when you come to the realization of your relationship with Allah, you have a sense of fear from the punishments that you could potentially face. That's one channel. Another channel that you can face is hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's when you begin to realize Allah is so merciful, so blessful that inshallah, may Allah make us all men and women of Jannah, inshallah. Right? May Allah put us in that place. So that's hope. And then there's a third stage as well, and that is the station of love. When you transcend the need for heaven and hellfire, or transcend the need for fear and hope, and you just want to do everything you can for the sake of Allah, because you just love Allah. If you look at the story of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, when he was in Taif, and you know how they badly treated him. They were stoning him, traditions say that he had so much blood that his blood stuck to his sandals, right? And so when he was literally just sitting down, he started making a dua to Allah. And all he said in that dua, in terms of, approaching towards Allah, he said, as long as you're happy with me, I'm happy. He purely did it for the sake of Allah. So these are the 3 relationships that you can potentially have. Fear, hope, and love. Right? There is a book, very interesting book by an expert in America. He's a graduate from Harvard University, NYE. And he's written a book called The Powers to Lead. And he's an expert in leadership and management. He said leadership can only be possible in 3 ways. 3 ways. You have 2 things which are transaction analysis and 1 thing which is transformation analysis. In transaction analysis, if you want to motivate your employees, if you're a leader and you want to motivate your employees, you either give them an incentive. So if you work hard, I'll give you more bonuses, right? So you have that hope factor there. And if you, by the same token, if you start slacking up in your job, then I'll reduce some money from your salary, or you have to work on the weekends. So there's that fear incentive as well. That's transactional. And when he talks about the transformational part, he said there's some leaders who can transform an entire community because he's created such a vision and character and philosophy that they just want to follow him because they love him, right? So for example, Mahatma Gandhi, Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is another example, and so on and so forth. So 3 things he mentioned. You've got hope, fear, and love. And the same thing applies to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Same thing, right? The highest station which we can achieve is that if we can look through the hope and the what's it called, the fear, which we have to have a balance of, by the way. We have to have a balance between the 2. Scholars say that the believer is like a bird. He's got 2 wings. 1 wing is of hope, and 1 wing is of fear. And his head is love. And that's how you balance this relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Brother Shoaib, who's come here to do many khutbahs several times, he mentioned something very, 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 mashallah, very deep point. He mentioned that as we progress through life, we have to use different channels in different parts of our lives. So for youth, so we're at university, and it's obvious we're going to face temptation, all sorts of stuff, right? And Brother Shoaib mentioned to me that in this stage, it is better if you approach the channel of fear, so that this way you can stay away from temptation. It helps you possibly further stay away. As you get older, and you're reaching more closer to death, then you begin to have hope in the mercy of Allah. And throughout the whole process, you try and establish and deepen that connection with love of God. Right? So that's the first thing. That connection with you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Next thing we look at, the second form of relationship. And that is between you and His creation, Allah's creation. And there are 4 categories that fit into this. 4 categories. There's the category of people, which divides into Muslims and non-Muslims. There's also the category of animals. There is rights of which we have with animals as well. And there are also rights of the environment you're surrounded by. So, Let's start off with Muslims. I'm sure that you already know plenty of traditions in and out of how we should treat one another, how we should show kindness to one another. A very famous example that comes to mind is when a group of family visited another poor family and they didn't have enough food to feed the guests. So they made whatever food they could, right? And they served it to the guests while they themselves had nothing but plain water. And because of that act of kindness, there are verses in the Quran revealed about these people, right? So there's a lot of reverence and kindness which we show to Muslims to one another. Let's focus on how we should treat our relationships with our non-Muslim brothers. Now, the only distinction between us and non-Muslims is that they don't have Islam, that's it. But we still have rights upon them. There's a saying that you have akhi min ad-deen wa akhi min at-teen. You have brother in faith, or brother in science, or brother in humanity, and then brother in religion, right? With Muslims, we're both brothers in humanity and brothers in faith. But if someone doesn't follow Islam, they're still our brother in humanity. We don't lose that right with them, right? And subhanAllah, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he has several examples on the way he showed kindness to even the non-believers. There's a very beautiful tradition where, so you know when he finished, when he tried to go to Ta'if and he tried to, give da'wah and try to, make them an Islamic civilization. They rejected him. Now Ta'if is a rival city of Mecca. It's a rival city of Mecca. It's like Liverpool and Manchester, for instance, right? A rival city. And what happened was, when the Meccans found out that he went to Ta'if to, for support, it's like he committed treason. So he could not go back into Mecca, right? And you can find this in Sirah books throughout. And so, when the Prophet ﷺ wanted to go back to Mecca, he had to ask for protection. Everything back then worked in a tribal system basis. You had to get, how you have a visa to get into a country, you had to get a tribal visa back then. You had to get someone who could offer you protection if you wanted to go back in Medina. So he applied the tribal visa to a few people. Many rejected, 2 rejected, 1 accepted. This one person who accepted, his name is Mut'im ibn Adi, right? And he is a mushrik. It's recorded in the Sirah books, he is a mushrik, i.e. he worships statues. And this is the worst thing that you can ever do in the sight of Allah. This is the worst thing you can ever do. Allah says He will forgive everything except for shirk. He will never ever forgive that, right? Obviously if you repent from that, but I'm saying if you die in that state, He will never forgive that. So much so, Mut'im ibn Adi, he got his entire family, all of his sons, he made them put on their armor, and he brought Prophet Muhammad ﷺ from the border of Mecca, took him back in, and went towards the Kaaba. And he publicly declared that I have offered Prophet Muhammad, he didn't say Prophet, but I have offered this man protection. And no one can harm him. So he offered Prophet Muhammad ﷺ support, right? And look how Prophet ﷺ, how he had it in his mind. This guy made such an impression that a couple of years down the line, when they had the Battle of Badr, this is the victory of Islam. It's known as the Day of Furqan, where everything was separated from truth from falsehood, and there's a clear justice that was maintained. 70 of the Qurayshi people were captured by the Muslims, prisoners of war, right? 70 people. There is a tradition by the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ where he says, explicitly in the hadith, I'm not making that explicitly, he said, if Mut'im ibn Adi was alive today, he just needed to say 1 word and I would have freed all these people. But showing you what? We still have that basic relationship even with non-Muslims. The only difference is that they don't believe Islam. Fair enough, right? But we don't lose that basic human relationship with our brothers in humanity. At least brothers in humanity. The third relationship with the creation, and that is the relationship which we have with the animals. SubhanAllah, and this is just from experience, the relationship which Muslims really lose out most on is the treatment of animals and the treatment of the environment. This is something we've completely forgotten when it's in the Sunnah. So there is a very interesting narration of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. There were some companions and they saw like a little nest, right? So they took 2 of the birds from the nest because they wanted to eat or something, right? And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he noticed that there's a bird hovering over him. And it was the mother of these 2 chicks. And he said, who took the birds of this little chick? Who took the birds? And one of the companions said, I did. He said, return the bird because the mother is crying. That's with an animal. That's with the rights of an animal. There's another tradition of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ where there was an ant farm next to a companion. And one of the companions got really irritated. So he burned the whole, the colony of the ants alive. And Prophet ﷺ, he got angry. He said, you destroyed a community. You destroyed a community which were glorifying you. SubhanAllah. You destroyed a community. And there's also an Islamic tradition, and you can check these out. These are actual hadiths. There's another hadith which says that if you do any harm to an animal, it is equivalent as if you did harm to a human being. Right? So next, and because I'm saying this because literally as like an observer, both in the Western countries, Eastern countries, we are not fulfilling our rights towards animals. We are not fulfilling and justifying those positions. Finally, another thing that I want to mention is the environment that you're in. And this is where it gets really bad. We're not being proactive enough to care about things like, water, treatment of water, the land that we're in, how we're supposed to maintain agriculture, how we're supposed to look after our environment, the trees which we're in, the facilitation in trying to preserve and sustain this for future generations. There is a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Do not, if you have a river flow full of water, so there's excessive water, he still said, do not waste water when you do wudu. He still mentioned, don't waste it, even though there's tons of water in front of you, don't waste it. Don't waste it. Unfortunately, nowadays, what's happening is that because as materialism is getting stronger, it's entering our hearts even further, we are beginning to get less and less empathetic with the environment around us. When bear in mind, and you can get this from Islamic sciences, that the earth and the environment will testify against you if you don't give it its due right. The earth will testify. The earth will testify against you if you don't give its right. So 4 things which I mentioned to you with regards to the rights of the creation. Your treatment with your fellow Muslims. Your treatment with your fellow non-Muslims. Your treatment with your fellow animals. There's still a creation of Allah. There's still a creation of Allah. And your treatment with the earth, with the environment that Allah has bestowed His mercy upon you. Treat this fairly. So to conclude the first khutbah, I talked about 2 relationships. The first relationship is between you and Allah. And there are 3 channels in which you can achieve this. Either through fear, taqwa in Arabic. Either through hope, right? Or either through love and God. These 3. And you've got to make sure you use the right relationship in the right time, in the right context. Number 2, your relationship with the creation of Allah. And that is between Muslims, non-Muslims, animals, and the environment. And inshallah, in the second part of the khutbah, we'll look at the third relationship, which is the most deepest understanding in all these 3 parts of Islam. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم. And alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. So, I told you in the beginning that we were looking at 3 relationships today. The first was between you and Allah, second between you and His creation, and the third I intentionally left out so you could have a guess during the first part of the khutbah. And the answer is, you also have a relationship between you and yourself. You and yourself. How do I get this? Sorry, before I begin, can I please ask the brothers if you could just squeeze up? We have a lot of brothers outside. Can you please just try and move up a bit, inshallah? We have so much space on the right-hand side. Please try and move, inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Thank you very much. So, the third relationship. How do you have a relationship with yourself? If you look at the story and the traditions of Adam alayhi salam, when, the origin of man, the starting point, and, God commanded Adam alayhi salam, He told in Surah Al-Baqarah, لا تقرب هذه الشجرة. Don't come near this tree. Don't come near this tree, right? فتكون من الظالمين, right? So that you may become a person who does wrong, right? The word that Allah used was ظالمين. And basically Allah's warning, if you eat from this tree, you become one of the dhulm, the people who do dhulm, right? Now the word dhulm in your English translations is 99% of the time it's translated as wrongdoer, or person who does evil, so on and so forth. But that's not the accurate description of that word. Dhulm actually means an oppressor. someone who oppresses something. So if there's, for example, this brother X here, right? If I take away his right, if I'm a tyrant and I take away his right, I force him to do things that's against his will, I'm being a tyrant, I'm being an oppressor, I'm being one of the zalimun, right? But the question is, there was nobody that could take away the rights of Adam salam, except for whom? Himself. Allah says in many different ayats of the Quran, do not do dhulm to your own self, anfusakum, to your own soul. And that tells you what? That you have the ability to oppress yourself. You have the ability to oppress yourself. I.e., there is a relationship that exists between you and yourself. Right? Now, this is the fundamental, hopefully inshallah, the fundamental message of this entire khutbah, is that we need to understand there is an inner reality that exists within us. There is an inner reality which we need to have a relationship with, and that is the soul. That is the nafs. You see, we have an external reality, and then we have an internal reality, right? So the external reality, many of us, and I'm not trying to just make everyone feel bad or anything, I'm saying many of us, we've been spoon-fed Islam, right? So we act Islam on this external reality, even though some of us don't have anything on the inside whatsoever. Seriously, like nil. I know one brother, I've spoken to one brother, so his family invited me to his house, and this guy, he prays 5 times a day, does whatever he can, comes to khutbahs, etc. But he has no trace of faith in his heart whatsoever. He says, I'm only doing this because of my mom and dad, that's it. I'm only doing this because of my mom and dad, that's it. That's what Islam is for him, just an external motion, that's it. What we need to do is we need to start going deeper and have a transition from that outer reality to the inner reality. And the way you do that is through breaking through three main things. You've got to break through your doubts. Some of us, we're not Muslims on the inside. We don't really care about it. It's because maybe we don't know about the religion. Maybe we don't understand what Islam means. See, many people, they act, they pray, do everything. But when it comes to why do you believe in God? I don't know. Why do you believe in the Prophet? I don't know. Why is the book miraculous? I don't know. So you're living your whole life in this illusion. You need to be honest with yourself, right? Then you have to break through your desires. Obviously, dunya is pulling you in every way possible. Alcohol, premarital engagements, right? Drugs, all these things come into play. And third thing is arrogance. Sometimes we have so much pride in our hearts that we let us get the better of ourselves. And one of the things that I wanted to mention is that especially people who come from non-practicing backgrounds, they find this relationship the most difficult. See, believing in Allah is not a difficult task. Something big happens and khalas, we can inshallah return to Allah. We can even inshallah try and fix our relationship with people, the creation of Allah. But sometimes, fixing our relationship with ourselves is one of the biggest things. So, if you look at people who've done, I don't know, zina for instance, right? You will hear people say, SubhanAllah, I've made tawbah to Allah, right? I've corrected my relationship with the person I did it with, but I still haven't forgiven myself. Right? So that relationship between you and yourself has got to take place. And that is the ultimate jihad. Jihad al-nafs is the ultimate jihad. Is when you break through, peel through all those layers of evil, of haram, of all the evil things that can crop up, and really connect and turn that light on. Because Allah is in there. Allah is in your heart. You just haven't found Him yet. You're trying to find Allah in all of these different places, but He's under your nose all along. He's in here. He's in here. You just got to work your way to it. If you look at Surah Al-Baqarah, it's very beautiful. Alif, Lam, Mim. Letters which we don't know the meaning of. And it says, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ. Indeed, this is a book that there is no doubt. And this is guidance for the muttaqeen, right? This is guidance for those people who are God conscious. And then He gives you a list of who those God conscious are. 5 things. It mentions belief in the ghaib, it mentions praying salah, it then talks about giving people charity, so on and so forth. It gives you a list. See, those things are the successive outcome once you go in. It starts off with what? Hudan lil muttaqeen. How do you get huda? How do you get taqwa? You first go in. And if you go back to the analogy that I mentioned in the beginning, if you're working in a job, you have a boss and you have colleagues around you, right? He didn't get in that position like that. He first needed to identify, what do I want to be in life? Right? He wanted to see, okay, I'm a good designer. I'll have an application in design, do my qualification in design. Then he got that job. And just like that, you need to probe yourself in your heart. You need to probe yourself in your heart and really identify who you are. Are you living a life of illusion? Or are you really living for the sake of Islam in your heart? Find the difference, and inshallah may Allah guide all of us, for the sake of Islam, towards Him, towards helping the creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also may Allah help us salvaging ourselves from the recklessness that exists out there. And inshallah, please do make sure that there's a huge storm that's come out in Philippines. Please also keep them in your du'as, inshallah. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما باركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. أقم الصلاة.